talking about working cattle. A good friend of mine, if they were working cattle on a Saturday or something like that, he'd call me up to come and help just to be an extra body. I wasn't really much use at anything, just another guy waving and yelling. But boy, they had one real mean one. They called it, I think they called it old skunk stripe or something like that. It's just mean, just real mean. I mean, it'd chase you up a fence, that type of thing. And, he had some nice, big fence, big metal fence and everything. And you could get up there and get out of the way and all that type of thing. But, boy, I mean, it wasn't enough to be sitting on top. I mean, she'd throw you over the other side if she could. And it reminded me, it gave me a new appreciation. There was a movie that came out back in the 90s called Jurassic Park. And at the very beginning of that movie, they got this cow all hoisted up, and they're dropping it down in the raptor pit. And it wiggles and jostles and everything. They bring it back up, and the cow is gone, and the thing's almost destroyed. And I thought, how many farmers have cows that they would gladly donate to the raptor feeding farms? Everybody's got an old skunk, just mean cow that they would just more than happy to donate to a dinosaur feeding program. But I told him about that, and he got to laugh, and he says, yeah, but you know what? You know what ended up happening? It ended up killing all the raptors. You let that cow in there with those raptors. So anyway, all right, Revelation chapter 11. Revelation chapter 11, continuing on here in Revelation chapter 11, verse 6. I don't know if this is part 3 or 4 or whatever it is. It's just wherever we're at here with it. Continuing on here. Revelation chapter 11, verse 6. It says, these have power to shut heaven that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. Let's go ahead and go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Lord God, I thank you for this day that you've given us. Lord, thank you for this cold, dreary fall day. Lord, you've blessed it. Lord, you've allowed these people to be here this evening, God. Lord, I pray that you bless them for, Lord, their faithfulness, Lord, their ability. Lord, I pray be with our church family members, Lord, that can't be here, that want to be here. Lord, some of them that are out sick. Lord, some of them are out quarantined. Lord, some of them just trying to keep an eye on their own health. Lord, some of them are probably just away. Lord, we pray for those that are out because they're backslid. And Lord, pray be with them, and Lord, work on them. Lord, I pray that, Lord, you draw nigh to them. Lord, that they draw nigh to you. These things I pray in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. All right. And so we've looked at a lot of different things in here. But one of the things that we got in at the close of it last time is that since the time element between the first and second coming is not given, at least not here, that Jew thought that the first coming was the second coming. He gets those comings confused, and because of that, that's why he inevitably ends up rejecting Jesus Christ in Acts chapter 7, and the reason why they're yelling, crucify him, is because they were expecting a king, and what they got was a prophet. And he didn't come as a king the first time. They wanted a king the first time. He comes as a king the second time. He came as a lamb the first time. He comes as a lion the second time. There's a difference, but they were expecting the lion whenever they got the lamb. They were expecting a king to rule and reign on a throne with a rod of iron, and what they got was a baby in a manger that nobody was interested in. They were expecting somebody goodly like King Solomon, and what they got was a man that with no form nor comeliness that we should desire him. That's what they got the first time. What they wanted was somebody that would rule and reign, not somebody that would die and perish. But they got him confused. And when he thought that they were identical, he rejects the Messiah that God gave him, and therefore he puts off indefinitely his opportunity to have a visible, literal, physical, Davidic, messianic kingdom in Palestine. It's been put off for 2,000 years of him getting what he was expecting to have. Now, the average Gentile American theologian, and when we talk about that group, we're talking about seminary professors and Greek scholars and ecumenical council leaders, people that like to get together. I'm not saying that there isn't some good things that are done through things like the Ministerial Alliance, but those tend to be ecumenical council type things where you're buddying up with people that we're all Christians and we're all under this umbrella, and we can all get along. Well, you get under an umbrella with a bunch of people that don't believe in salvation, in biblical salvation. Well, we can't all get along. You know, it doesn't mean that you can't do some good things together. It doesn't mean you can't do the bargain barn or a soup kitchen or, you know, hand out food to the hungry and things like that. But listen, there's going to be a limitation on what we can do together, right? We can't get everybody under the same roof and preach biblical salvation and make everybody happy, because we're not all going to get together. But those people, these ecumenical council people, make the same error, except they make it backwards. In this age, he looks back to the first coming, and he says that since there's no time element given between the first and second coming, when Christ came the first time, that the fulfillment of the literal, physical, visible promises of Israel are already given. So he makes the second coming the first coming. Therefore, since the Jews did not get that literal, physical, visible promise, these promises are to be spiritualized, and they're applied to the Christian. Now, you get a lot of Christians today that spiritualize that, but you have Christian denominations that take that literally, that since the Jews rejected Jesus Christ, that they get the literal, physical, visible kingdom now. That's why you had, 500 to 600 years. It might have been longer than that. I'm trying to remember. It was from about 1100 to, I want to say, 1500 AD that the Crusades were fought. Why were those Crusades fought? Because the Catholic Church taught that since the Jews had rejected Jesus Christ, that all of those land grant promises that were given under the Davidic covenant, those were handed off to the new caretakers of, the religion under Christ, which they claim to be Catholicism. And so they pack everybody up and they say, well, the mic is gone out. All right, we'll move over to another mic. All right. We just won't worry about this. And so you got a bunch of these guys that they teach that the kingdom belongs to them. Well, if the kingdom belongs to you, then they're under the misconception that they're under a literal, physical, visible kingdom. And if you're under a literal, physical, visible kingdom, then it's a literal, physical, visible war that you're in. And so they put spear and shield and sword, and they pack everybody up, and they start marching to the Middle East to try to take the Middle East from the Muslims. And they spend about probably close to 600 years doing that. Until what? Until you start running out of men. And you know what happens at the latter end of the Crusades? You have something called the Children's Crusade. The Catholic Church couldn't get enough grown men and adults to go down there and fight for the Promised Land, so they convinced a bunch of children and orphans to go down there. And guess what happens as they're marching on their way to the Crusades? Well, like what's been going on for years and years and years, and since the beginning of time, really, even up until today, you got a bunch of people that capture a bunch of those kids, and they end up selling them off as slaves. That's what happens when you get your dispensations out of whack. You end up putting on yourself something that doesn't belong to you. So you take promises that don't belong to you, and you go and you try to act on promises that don't belong to you, and you get a bunch of people killed for nothing. That's what the Crusades were, a bunch of people killed for nothing, on both sides. Now, might make for some fun movies and books to read, but outside of that, there wasn't any doctrinal truth that come out of it, And so that's where I start to get frustrated. You get somebody like Barack Obama a number of years ago. He was trying to defend Islam, trying to defend the Muslim terrorists and all that kind of thing, and he ends up making a foolish statement about, before you criticize the Muslims, before you get up on your high horse, let's not forget the Crusades done by the Christians that went down and killed all these Muslims. Well, for one, we're talking about something that happened 500 years ago versus something that's happening today. And two, those weren't Christians. Those were Catholics. There is a difference. Even the Catholics know that there's a difference between a Catholic and a Christian. I've overheard this in one of my classes. I remember hearing a student say this, and he said it in truth and in honesty. He said, I'm a Catholic, I'm not a Christian. That's some truth right there. He knew that. You got a bunch of Christians today that don't know the difference. They think they're the same thing. They're not the same thing. But that's what happens when you start taking on those promises. And that's how God makes fools out of everybody. You say, well, not us Baptists. Oh, of course a bunch of Baptists do that. Let's see. This one you'll know. Oh, I turned right there. Isn't that nice? 2 Chronicles 7:14. I can't tell you. I've walked into at least 2 Baptist churches, one Southern Baptist and one Independent Baptist church, that had a really beautiful picture of an American flag, all kind of tattered and torn, sitting across the knees of somebody who had pinned, needle and thread, fixing an American flag, and underneath that little picture was a little golden plaque inscribed with the inscription 2 Chronicles 7:14, which says, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. And you've got a bunch of Baptist idiots posting that stuff in their churches. You know what that is? You're just as bad as the Catholics. Because what? You're taking a promise that doesn't belong to you and say, well, if we just do this, this, and this, then we'll get this, this, and that. You won't get it. The Lord's not going to heal your land because he never promised anything about your land. That was a land grant given to a bunch of Jews in the Old Testament. That is what we call a kingdom of heaven doctrinal position. And you don't have it. The Lord never promised to bless your land because he never promised you any land to begin with. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't take something from there and say that there's nothing wrong with you humbling yourselves. There's nothing wrong with you praying. There's nothing wrong with you seeking his face. There's nothing wrong with you turning from your wicked ways. But don't expect the promise because the promise doesn't belong to you. It doesn't mean he won't hear your prayer or heal you or do any one of a number of other things, but that promise doesn't belong to you or any other Baptist living in this age. That's foolishness. And it comes from a failure to rightly divide the word of truth. So I know that I wear you guys out with, well, he's awfully hard on the Christian church and he's awfully hard on the Catholics. There's a bunch of fool Baptists out there too. I'm an equal opportunity slammer. We'll get slammed too. But let me get to a point where, God writes a New Testament to make a fool out of an unsaved Jew, and he writes the Old Testament to make a fool out of an unsaved Gentile. And the resulting fool is the product of a bad heart. When the Gentile turns up his nose at the Old Testament, turns his nose up at the Old Testament Jew for making a mistake in regard to the kingdom, he should remember that he's already made the same mistake. You better get, how's it put it? Get the plank out of your own eye before you start pulling the splinter out of somebody else's. The Jews thought that because there was no time element given between the two, between the first coming and the second coming, that they didn't want this Messiah as a literal, physical, visible leader. So they killed him. And he arose from the dead, and they had a second chance to receive that leader, that kingdom, but they turned it down. And from that point on, a new era comes in which you don't get a physical kingdom anymore, you get a spiritual one. And it's a spiritual kingdom that's preached, that a man has to be born again, and that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, that our enemies are spiritual enemies. Your enemies, your adversary, is a spiritual enemy, a devil, that it's spiritual wickedness in high places, that it's those things that you have to fight against. So you have spiritual enemies and you have spiritual blessings in heavenly places until the second coming of Christ. But the time element between the first and second coming is unknown, at least as far as where you're reading about here. And that means that Jesus Christ could have come back to this earth anytime up to Acts chapter 7. And every promise in the Old Testament would have been fulfilled. When Stephen is stoned in Acts chapter 7, He looks up to heaven and he sees the Son of Man standing. We covered that last week, I believe. You look at there at the end of Acts chapter 7. Stephen looks up and he sees Jesus Christ standing at the right hand of the Father. And of course, I don't know if anybody find it between, I guess it's been actually a couple weeks because I was gone last week. But did anybody find I know of at least two. You have Stephen and you have Jesus Christ, but I was thinking there was a third whose last words were, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Nobody found a third. I know there's at least two. There's Stephen and Jesus Christ. But whenever Stephen sees the Lord, he sees him standing up, ready to come back. And from there on in the Bible, he's always spoken of as being seated at the right hand of the Father. Why is that? Because he's waiting for the end of the church age to be over before he comes back. A new dispensation begins. Okay? He didn't return. And so the time element is an unknown element. It means that the physical, literal, visible promises given to Israel in the Old Testament in regards to the second coming of Christ take place later. It does not mean that they're being spiritualized to be put in this age. But you do still have some groups out there that believe that they are the literal, physical, visible Jews. You have what is called British Israelism. They believe that they are that the Jews that are today, and this is anti-Semitism in its modern sense, is that you've got a group called British Israelites. They believe that they are the true Jews, that the Jews that you see today are fake Jews. Not fake news, fake Jews. You also have a group called Black Israel Hebrews or something, Black Hebrew Israelites or something like that. And they believe that you get a bunch of, I'm not trying to be racist here, but a bunch of black guys that think they're the true Jews. And that's been a more recent thing probably. I don't know how long it's been around for, but I've heard of them coming up in the news here recently. And so, they're a bunch of Jew haters because they're the real Jews. And it's all a way to get something that doesn't belong to them. Whether it's British Israelites or Black Hebrew Israelites or whatever it is, it's trying to get something that doesn't belong to you and trying to use the Bible to prove that it belongs to you when it doesn't. But it doesn't mean that these promises are to be spiritualized and put in this age. That's where the modernist, that's where your liberals, that's where your dead Orthodox conservatives, that's where they make their mistakes. The unknown time element is the day and age in which we are living. It's called the church age. That's the unknown time element. That's the thing that separates the two, the first coming from the second coming. Boy, it's coming down now. And this is the age of the calling out. The word church itself is a Greek word. It's ecclesia, a called out assembly. That's why when you look into the book of Exodus, they're called the church in the wilderness. Why were they called a church? Because they're called out of Egypt. And boy, there's so many similarities between what you see with the children of Israel coming out of Egypt and going into the promised land, between where we are right now. It doesn't make you an Israelite, but it shows you that if you look at the book of Exodus, you see that they're called out of Egypt. What is Egypt a type of? Type of the world. As Christians, you're told that you are not of this world, right? We are strangers in a strange place. This world is not your home. All right? So you're called out of it. All right? Now, the general direction that Israel heads after leaving Israel is north. They head north. All right? Promotion cometh not from the east or the west or the south, but from God. Where is God? In the north. So when you leave here at the rapture, you head north. What do they cross through before they get there? They cross through a Red Sea. You're going to cross through a body of water. And that water has been stained in the blood of Jesus Christ, because whenever he shed his blood, that's eternal blood. And so you're going to cross through a Red Sea on your way on into heaven. And of course, before they get there, they cross through the Jordan. They cross through Jordan River. Now, we've looked at some things in terms of the structure of the universe, how it's got a pyramid type shape. It'd look like a little bit more like a poncho, and you got a body of water at the top, and you're going to have to go through that body of water at the top. And isn't it funny how many, you ought to pay attention when you sing some of these hymns, because so many of them tell you about going through a body of water to get into heaven. I won't have to cross Jordan alone. On Jordan's stormy banks I stand. And those are the two that I have off the top of my head. But you ought to pay attention to how much of your hymn book has to do with crossing through a body of water to get into heaven. It's an amazing number of them. In fact, oh gosh, what is it? We just sang it. Will my anchor hold? Now, here's the funny thing is that your anchor, Jesus Christ, it says that my anchor is in that, is firm. But the problem is that your anchor isn't down here. Your anchor has been thrown up. That's where your anchor is. It's above your head. And it's an amazing thing. I could get off on this here a little bit, but in terms of going through outer space and the connection to outer space and the trip that you're going to take when you get raptured out going into heaven has to do the connection that it has to the sea. It's amazing to me how Hollywood plays right into the Bible without even realizing it. For instance, of course, whenever mankind was sailing across the sea, what did he use? Well, he used the stars. He had to look up to get across the land. But we send people out into space, and what do we call them? Astronauts. Naut is N-A-U-T. It stands for nautical. In fact, we don't send them out on space planes. We sent them out on spaceships. We call them captains. And all of those things have a nautical theme to them. In fact, there's so much of a connection between the two in the Bible that early map makers got confused with what they were dealing with, because what they saw whenever they read through the Bible is that out there's a great Leviathan, a dragon. In fact, what I believe the Bible says over there in the book of Job, when he talks about that Leviathan, he says that the scales are so close together that air cannot pass between them. If somebody runs the reference on that, I'll read it out to them. But so it talks about that Leviathan. Well, the Leviathan that we're speaking, there's stuff out there. It wasn't some kraken out in the Atlantic or the Pacific, but you've got a great dragon out there in outer space. Now that we find out that great red dragon is the devil, but he's not in the ocean. That's what they were afraid of. And so you look at these old maps, and you'll find some kraken, some multi-headed beast out there in the water. The problem is it's not out there in the water. It's up there above your head. Job 41. Man, I'm just happy I had the right book. I do that a lot. Job 41, starting in verse 15. Yeah, verse 15. Let's see. Let's go back a little bit. Let's see. Now, go to verse 1. Verse 1 will get you the context. Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook? Well, what do you use? What do you draw out with a hook? Well, you usually draw out fish with a hook. So you start to see, okay, well, they're talking about something that's out there in the water. Or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down. Canst thou put a hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications unto thee? Will he speak? Notice that. Notice, will he speak soft words unto thee? So it's a beast that can speak. Now, you watch something like Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or something like that. How many times do they have a dragon that can talk? More and more now. You see, Hollywood, they rip all this stuff right out of the Bible. Now, granted, that comes from Tolkien, who was a Christian, although Hollywood won't talk about that. And so is C.S. Lewis, and he's got talking dragons in his books. Where do they get it from? They get it from the Bible. Will he make a covenant with thee? Wilt thou take him for a servant forever? Wilt thou play with him as with a bird, or wilt thou bind him for thy maidens? Kind of making a joke out of it. Shall the companions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him among the merchants? Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears? These are all, now notice, fish spears. So the idea is he's out there in the water somewhere. But notice as we get over to verse 13, who can discover the face of his garment? Or who can come to him with his double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? His teeth are terrible round about. His scales are his pride, shut up together as with a closed seal, one so near to another that no air can come between them. Why didn't it say water? It said no air. He's not out there in the water. He's out there in outer space. And so, but they miss it. Now, what was my point in all that? Well, I can't tell you for the slightest, but it's, what's that? Nautical themed. I'd have to go back further than that, but the unknown time element. Okay, so we get into the church age, calling out. Okay, calling out brought me to Exodus and the stuff that's over there in Exodus that shows you about the rapture. I got talking about the rapture, which brought me out to outer space. All right, there's the chain. And in outer space tells you about the devil. That's why you don't want to go out there. I know they're talking about trying to go to Mars all the time. You don't want to go out there. If they do, I think they need to be afraid of what they run into, because out there is where the devils are. You got a little bit of safety here. You go out there, you're in trouble. So it's what's out there that's going to come down here. Will they ever make it? If they made it, they wouldn't survive it, because everything out there is designed to kill you. There's nothing on Mars for you. It's a dead planet. You're not going to make it alive. There's a lot to all of that. No, if they could make it, it's a one-way trip. Mankind isn't. Here's the problem with it, and this is my theory on it. If you want it, is that God made all that stuff that's out there, right? He made the stars also. He made all the planets, all that stuff that you see out there in the solar system. He made. Now, this is my theory on it, is that at one time, it was designed to be livable. So my thinking is this, is that if they ever sent a rover to Mars that found evidence of early life, I don't see where it would have any problem with the Bible. You say, what do you mean? How would there not be a problem with the Bible? Doesn't that prove that there was evolution over the course of millions and millions of years and that it just died out because of this? No, here's what I think. If they found evidence of life there, it's because it should have been a livable planet. But it got cursed the moment that Adam and Eve ate of that fruit in the garden. And so the curse that we have here on the earth, in whatever form that it took, was designed not only to make life hard here on earth, but to make it impossible to go anywhere else. And so if you want to know the truth, we've been under quarantine for 6,000 years because we have a disease. That disease is sin. And so rather than let sin spread out to the rest of the universe, he just said, listen, you can't go anywhere else. You can't live anywhere else. I'm quarantining you to this planet. And you're stuck here until there's a new heavens and a new earth. And the only reason that you're going to be able to go out then is because I'm going to deal with sin. Because he deals with it. You're not going anywhere during the millennium either. You're going to be down here on earth with Jesus Christ for 1,000 years. And after he's dealt with sin, death and hell are cast into the lake of fire and all that other kind of stuff, and sin is dealt with, then you can go out there. And I don't know. I've got a lot of theories on it. I don't know that outer space was always a vacuum. There's no air out there now. But why is that? I think he's designed it to be uninhabitable. Why? To keep you here. You can't live anywhere else. Why? Because there's sin here, and you've got to deal with your sin. And he's not going to let you spread it onto the rest of creation, so he kills all the other planets. There's nothing out there for you. So do with that what you will, but you're under quarantine. You just, have a planet you have to stick to. All right. Probably getting close here. But if Moses, let me get to the end on that thought. But this church age period, it's an unknown period of time, and the end of it is not clearly given in Scripture, at least not what they're seeing. So if Moses and Elijah are going to come back before the second coming of Christ, and they are, then they have yet to come, and they're going to come in the future. If Christ had returned in Acts chapter 7, then Elijah would have fulfilled the promises in the Old Testament by appearing in spirit and in power in John the Baptist. And what about Moses? Well, there's no clear promise in the Old Testament that Moses had to come back. The only clear promise is that Elijah will come, and that's what you see in Malachi chapter 4, verse 3 through 6, which would bring us to our first slide of the evening if we didn't need to go ahead and probably close right there. So that's the stuff that we'll get into next time. Are there any questions before we close? We're not necessarily super pressed for time, but before we start into that, questions or comments? You get me talking about the universe and outer space, all that stuff's just phenomenally neat to me. If they could get there, you couldn't, you'd have to take everything with you that you'd need. But on a biblical side, I worry about what they would run into out there. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. So in terms of, oh, okay. Yeah, so you bring up an interesting point. He brings up the Tower of Babel. I think that there's, and you're not going to probably find a whole lot to go on in terms of this, but it is my personal opinion, and I'm probably not the only person that thinks this, but I don't think the Tower of Babel was just a really tall tower. You still had, at the time of the Tower of Babel, you still had sons of God running around. And so you had people with an advanced knowledge of the stars and the universe and everything else that goes along with that. So you would have had fallen angels and their descendants there for that Tower of Babel. And let's see, let's go over there real quick. Let's see, we're in Genesis 11. I can get there. Okay. All right, even verse 1, the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. That's going to be the desire of the world during the tribulation, is to have basically everything. It's what we refer to today, and you hear a lot talked about it in terms of globalism, which is one world currency, one world government, one world religion, and you can see things moving that direction even right now. That's what my ears always perk up when you hear about a cashless society and there's no change, which means there's no cash, which means what? It means it's really easy to move everything over to one thing. All right, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. They said one to another, "Go, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. All right, so they begin to build this tower, and you say, well, there's no way it could be a spacecraft because they're using brick and mortar. Did you know this about the space shuttle? That the undercoating of the space shuttle is ceramic tiles? What's your massive difference between brick and tile? Not much. Okay, you might be able to say something about slime, but it doesn't tell you what that slime is. As far as you know, that's an advanced adhesive. It's just being called slime there. Okay? And let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. Well, I don't know how high up your stratospheric levels go unless things were climately different at the time. But right now, before you get to outer space, you're talking about going up something like, goodness, your aircraft fly at 35,000 feet. So at 35,000 feet, you divide 35,000 by approximately 5,000 feet. So, I mean, you got planes flying around at 7 miles high, right? I would say that, outer space is probably, let's just say it's 30 miles up. Okay, that's to get to outer space. Now, you got two things that you could probably go with on that before we get to the other, which is the Bible refers to 3 different heavens. It refers to the first heaven, which is just the sky where the birds fly. You have the second heaven, which is outer space, where your stars and planets all reside. And then you have the third heaven. And so at the very least, I don't think they're trying to get up into the sky. They're trying to reach either 1, outer space, or 2, heaven. Now, based upon who's there with them, I don't think they're trying to reach the third heaven because they know they can't get there. They've been kicked out of there. And so they're trying to reach outer space. Why? To get off the planet. Okay? Why do they want off the planet? Well, who do you see show up in chapter 10? Okay? Chapter 9, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10, Noah. First verse in all 3 chapters, 8, 9, and 10. Okay? Now, the flood has already happened. Okay? So you have some rebuilding time that's taken place. So I'm not sure exactly what the time frame is between chapter 10 and chapter 11, but it has to be enough time where you can get a bunch of people together. We know that the sons of God come back because you wind up with people like Goliath in 1 Samuel. So you've got some of these guys that come back, and they've got kids, and they're doing the whole thing again. But the idea is we got to figure out how to get off this planet because he's just flooded the thing once. We got to figure out how to get off. We got to become, like Elon Musk says, we have to become a multiplanetary species, or we're all going to get wiped out through some cataclysm. The only thing is that you're not worried about an asteroid, you're worried about God. So the further and further man gets from God, the more of a desire he has to get off the planet. Because the more sin that there is, the further you get from God, the more judgment that comes with that, unless you can get off the planet. And so they try to build a tower that can reach heaven, that can get to another planet. That's my thinking anyway. Because notice this, and make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. It doesn't ever call it a building necessarily, but it calls it a tower. Do you know that's the very same thing that they call the stand that holds up the rockets? Those are towers. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us, okay, that's the Lord talking to himself, because he's a Trinity. Let us go down there and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of the whole earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language. You could look at it probably from a couple of different perspectives. You say that the Lord wanted people to spread out, so he sends a form of persecution. He does the same thing to the early church. They wanted to stay all there in kind of Antioch and Jerusalem. The Lord sends persecution and spreads them out over the whole earth. But, I don't know. There seems to be something in there that kind of bothered the Lord about that tower. And so he scatters their language, and notice that he scatters them. He says, let's see if I can find it. Let us go down there and confound. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. He scattered them. Okay, so we're getting into something else here, but let's see if I can find it. Likely because And that's not hard to imagine because you've just had an event that brought mankind back down to 8 people. All right, so mankind's going to build around those 8 people, and those 8 people begin to grow and grow and grow, but they're all kind of still in that same area. Now, the other thing about this, and again, you don't have to take this. Let's see, where is he at? Huh? Genesis, that was what I just read was from Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 7 or so. But I'm looking for a guy named, there he is, Genesis chapter 10, verse 25. Okay, notice how it said after that whole scattering the language that the Lord scattered them. He scattered them upon the face of the whole earth. Now, you could just give him credit by saying he scattered them by changing their languages. But notice this, it says in Genesis 10:25, and unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Now that verse doesn't mean a whole lot on its face unless you know what some of those names mean. Peleg's name means earthquake, for in his days the earth was divided. Now, you could make that, if you just said in his days the earth was divided and you just read that, you'd say, okay, well in the days of Peleg, the people were scattered upon the face of the earth. All right, they just spread out. But except his name means earthquake. So his name is earthquake, for in his days the earth was divided. An earthquake that divided the earth. Okay, you know what you call that today? You call that plate tectonic shift. And they say that it took millions and millions and millions of years for all your continents to get spread out all over the whole earth. Well, it appears that the Lord can do it much quicker if he wants to. And that's how you wind up with people on 7 different continents. Interesting that it's 7 different continents. And if you look at those continents, you can see how they exactly fit, how they for the most part fit together. You find pyramids in Africa, and the continent that would have rubbed up right next against it is South America, and you find pyramids in South America. You find things that are similar between those places. They have a commonness, and it explains why you have people all the way down in Australia, and then people that share a common body type between Africa and Australia, and all the way out in some of these little bitty islands that are thousands of miles from any major body of land. How do you get people in Vanuatu? You think they got there off a little boat? I think the Lord placed them there. They were there whenever the earth was divided, and they've been there ever since. Take that for what you will. I don't know. We'll find out when we get to heaven who's right and who's crazy. Maybe I'm just crazy. But it seems awfully interesting when you look at some of that and you say, okay, all this stuff that's told that it took millions and millions of years to do, the Lord can do much quicker if he wants. And we could spend time looking at, the Grand Canyon. They'll show all these layers of stone. It took millions and millions of years. There's a canyon that was formed within a matter of 2 weeks after Mount St. Helens blew that has all the same rock layers. It took 2 weeks. Took 2 weeks to get all those layers. Why? Because there was a flood. Whenever that top came off Mount St. Helens, it backed up the river. And whenever that river finally broke through, it flooded that whole place. And you had a canyon form, a canyon. Not just, that canyon was formed through a flood. Okay, well, you put a flood over the course of the whole earth, what are you going to find? You're going to get some canyons real fast. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. Boy, there's a book I've already loaned it out, but it's by Henry M. Morris and I think a guy by the name of Whitcomb called The Genesis Flood, and all the stuff that's thought to be evolutionary evidence, and how all that evolutionary quote-unquote evidence is only evidence of a flood, a global flood that took place about 6,000 years ago, a little less. So anyway, I know that didn't have a whole lot to do with where we're at here in Revelation, but some interesting stuff. So yeah, I don't know. You get talking about the curse in connection to the Tower of Babel. I'd say that the motivation is the same. He spreads that curse throughout the cosmos to keep mankind quarantined, and he does the same thing with making sure mankind stays spread out upon the earth and isn't trying to get off. So I think the closer and closer that we get to them colonizing another planet, the closer and closer we get to the Lord coming back. Because there's not going to be a colony on Mars. There's not going to be a colony on the moon. Everybody's going to be here when the Lord comes back. So anyway, any questions or comments on that? All right. Turns out I didn't get you out of here early after all. We'll take a break here and go pray. And the